In your view, where does Sri Lanka stand? How concerning is the question of economic freedom of Sri Lanka? Not just the current context, but policies that we have adopted for decades.
1977, we had one second developing country in the world to undertake the economic reforms, widespread economic reforms. But we could not complete it. It didn't go far enough in my judgment. That is that we did very well on trade, we did very well on running the macroeconomics at the beginning, but it faltered as we proceeded. And one of the reasons why we did not hold on to the reform program, because there were other things interfering. For example, we started Mahaweli. Mahaweli took a lot of attention of the government and also had a very huge demand on the government of expenditure. So while we are trying to improve the tradable sector, that is exports and imports, import substitution, Mahaweli intervened in this sense that the government had to spend a lot of money, and particularly these expenditures on the economy were more on non-tradable goods, so it appreciated the exchange rate. So on the one hand, we were promoting the export sector, the tradable sector. On the other hand, we were doing something that to an extent negated what we were trying to do. Later it came to be called the Dutch disease. That is when one project or one export does very well, it sets the exchange rate for others, and it was not very beneficial to us. Second thing is that I included myself, that we didn't look beyond the trade very much. We didn't change the institutions very much. We left the public enterprises as they were, and public enterprises have been a headache all the time to us. And so we actually didn't continue with that thing. There were changes in the government. It's ideologically, one party was not for freedom, for economic freedom, other parties were for it. And so there was no consensus how to proceed. Being a democracy, our governments must change, and it did change. So the enthusiasm that one government had did not carry to the next stage.
You did speak of the 5 areas, what we may have done well and what we may not have. I'd also like you to touch on that as we speak.
Number one, government, where we have done quite okay, better, but that is actually the size of the government, and why we have done better there, not because we are better off in terms of managing government expenditure and taxes. Of course, our tax system, if we look at our direct marginal taxes, income taxes, the ratios are quite lower compared to many other countries. That is one positive area that we have. But other than that, the government revenue is quite low, about 12-13% of GDP, so that the government is restricted by that for spending on private consumption and private investment. So that is why when we dig deeper into that area, it is not a positive achievement actually, it reflects the inefficiency of our taxation system. Number two, legal system. This is the area out of those 5 areas where Sri Lanka has the poorest score in economic freedom, legal system, the rule of law. Throughout our history, starting from 1977 policy reform, I must say that market economy, the foundation of the open economy, is actually the rule of law. When you don't have that foundation, you are building a house without the foundation and it is shaky. So that's what has happened to Sri Lanka, and this is also an area where we haven't improved that much up to today. Third, that is the money, and this is another area which is actually the central bank's policy. This is also quite fairly okay because it measures the inflation and money supply and all these monetary policy measures, and they are quite okay. So this is the only area where Sri Lanka has scored the highest score. And then international trade, freedom for trade internationally, and that means exporting and importing. In this area, although we established our trade liberalization policies in 1977, during the last 10 years so we have actually moved backward. This is the area, another critical area, that Sri Lanka has been on reverse direction. And that is very critical, and even we can confirm those things by looking at our trade performance. And then next area would be regulation of business environment, regulation of the labor market, and regulation of the financial. So in this particular area, if you look at those areas, actually we haven't done quite well in those areas because we haven't touched actually some of these areas. And our administrative system, our lengthy bureaucratic procedures, and our labor regulatory systems, and the lack of mandatory costs for dismissal of labor. So in all these areas, Sri Lanka scores quite low. So Sri Lanka is not a good performer in terms of our economic freedom in the country, and that's why it is quite consistent with our economic performance also. If you have the higher economic freedom, your income is higher, your growth rates are higher, your export performance are higher, right. Your human development is higher, your corruption is lower, poverty is lower. So all these things are nicely connected to the level of economic freedom, and we can see those things by looking at the other countries. So that in that sense, Sri Lanka has a long way to improve our status.
I think in more recent times we've been talking about Budget 2021 and the decisions that government has taken with regard to taxation and the taxation policy. But do you not think that the government has ensured economic freedom with the current tax regime, or are there any challenges that you foresee?
The problem with the tax reduction and the way we are handling it is we are thinking that reducing taxes can somehow make the economy better, and that it is by itself a sign of more freedom. But if that takes away money that the government can use to protect the vulnerable, to protect the poor, to uplift social services, then actually we are generating unfreedom. So there's a tension. Obviously we don't want government to tax everything you earn, but neither do we want government to actually create unfreedom for the vulnerable, right? And so you have to figure out how you solve that problem in a reasonable, equitable way.